These are the graves of 60 famous athletes whose stories ended too soon, too hard, or too far from the finish line they were still running toward. Football players, baseball legends, boxers, race car drivers, basketball stars, and Olympians. Their final resting places spread across the country. Each one a marker for a career the sport was not finished. Jackie Robinson was buried at Cypress Hills Cemetery in Brooklyn, New York, after he died on October 24, 1972, at age 53 from a heart attack at his Connecticut home. The man who broke Major League Baseball's color barrier on April 15, 1947, had spent his final years battling diabetes, heart disease, and near-total blindness. More than 50,000 people lined the streets of New York for his funeral procession, one of the largest public gatherings the city had seen in years. Satchel Paige was buried at Forest Hill Cemetery in Kansas City, Missouri, after he died on June 8, 1982, at approximately age 75 from emphysema and heart failure. The Negro Leagues legend had not been permitted to play in the major leagues until age 42, when he joined the Cleveland Indians in 1948. Making him both the oldest rookie and oldest pitcher in American League history. His exact birth date was never confirmed, and he used the uncertainty as a source of wry humor throughout his life. Ray Chapman was buried at Lakeview Cemetery in Cleveland, Ohio, after he died on August 17, 1920, at age 29 from a fractured skull sustained when he was struck by a pitch thrown by Carl Mays of the New York Yankees. He remains the only player in Major League Baseball history to die as a direct result of an in-game injury. His death led to rule changes requiring umpires to regularly replace discolored or scuffed baseballs. Walter Payton was buried at Rest Haven Cemetery in Columbia, Mississippi, after he died on November 1, 1999, at age 45 from bile duct cancer. The Chicago Bears running back nicknamed Sweetness had rushed for 16,726 yards across 13 NFL seasons. He was buried beside his mother in the Mississippi town where he was born, returning in death to the roots that had shaped everything about the way he ran, blocked, and never came off the field. Dale Earnhardt was buried at Forest Lawn West Cemetery in Concord, North Carolina, after he died on February 18, 2001, at age 49 from a basilar skull fracture in a last-lap crash at the Daytona 500. The 7-time Cup Series champion known as the Intimidator had dominated NASCAR for 2 decades. His death led to immediate sweeping safety reforms across the sport, including mandatory head and neck restraint systems that are credited with saving numerous lives in the years since. Ayrton Senna was buried at Morumbi Cemetery in São Paulo, Brazil, after he died on May 1, 1994, at age 34 from head injuries sustained when his car struck a concrete barrier at the San Marino Grand Prix in Imola, Italy. The 3-time Formula One world champion was a national hero in Brazil. An estimated 3 million people lined the streets of São Paulo for his funeral procession, and one of the largest outpourings of public grief in Brazilian history. Len Bias was buried at Lincoln Memorial Cemetery in Suitland, Maryland, after he died on June 19, 1986, at age 22 from cocaine-induced cardiac arrest in his University of Maryland dormitory, just 40 hours after being selected second overall in the NBA draft by the Boston Celtics. Widely considered one of the greatest basketball prospects ever seen, his death prompted Congress to pass sweeping anti-drug legislation that shaped American drug policy for a generation. Knute Rockne was buried at Highland Cemetery in South Bend, Indiana, after he died on March 31, 1931, at age 43 when the aircraft he was aboard disintegrated in flight over Kansas. The Notre Dame football coach had compiled an 88.1 winning percentage, the highest in college football history. A's President Herbert Hoover personally offered condolences to his family, and the nation mourned him as a figure whose influence had extended far beyond the sidelines of any stadium. Brian Piccolo was buried at Mount Auburn Cemetery in Evergreen Park, Illinois, after he died on June 16, 1970, at age 26 from embryonal cell carcinoma. The Chicago Bears running back had continued playing alongside Gale Sayers even as his illness progressed, and his story became one of the most watched television films in American history in 1971's Brian's Song. He was 26 years old and had refused to stop competing until he physically could not continue. Ernie Davis was buried at Lakeview Cemetery in Erie, Pennsylvania, after he died on May 18, 1963, at age 23 from leukemia before playing a single professional game. The first African American to win the Heisman Trophy in 1961, was selected first overall in the 1962 NFL Draft, and diagnosed with leukemia during his first training camp. He spent his final months attending Cleveland Browns practices, suited but not playing, watching the game he would never get to play at its highest level. Jim Valvano was buried at Oakwood Cemetery in Cary, North Carolina, after he died on April 28, 1993, at age 47, from metastatic adenocarcinoma. The NC State coach who orchestrated one of college basketball's most celebrated championship upsets in 1983 delivered his "Don't Give Up, Don't Ever Give Up" speech at the 1993 ESPY Awards just weeks before his death. The Jimmy V Foundation he co-founded has raised hundreds of millions for cancer research since. Florence Griffith Joyner was buried at Chestnut Hill Cemetery in Mission Viejo, California, after she died on September 21, 1998, at age 38, from an epileptic seizure at her home. The fastest woman in history had set world records of 10.49 seconds in the 100 meters and 21.34 in the 200 meters at the 1988 Seoul Olympics, records that still stand today. She had retired from competition after Seoul, and her sudden death a decade later shocked the global athletics community. Payne Stewart was buried at Woodlawn Memorial Park in Orlando, Florida, after he died on October 25, 1999, at age 42, when the Learjet carrying him to a tournament depressurized and flew on autopilot for 4 hours before crashing in South Dakota. The three-time major champion had won the U.S. Open just 4 months before his death. He was known as much for his knickerbockers and tam o'shanter cap as for his game, his image inseparable from the sport he defined. Hank Gathers was buried at Inglewood Park Cemetery in Inglewood, California, after he died on March 4, 1990, at age 23 from hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, collapsing at mid-court during a conference tournament game at Loyola Marymount University in front of his teammates and a full arena. The previous season, he had become only the second college player in history to lead the nation in both scoring and rebounding simultaneously. He died before an ambulance could reach him on the gym floor. Reggie Lewis was buried at Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge, Massachusetts, after he died on July 27, 1993, at age 27, from sudden cardiac arrest while shooting free throws alone in an off-season gym workout. Nay, the Boston Celtics captain, had been battling a heart condition diagnosed earlier that year. He was 27 years old, was considered the future of the Celtics franchise, and was found on the floor of the gym by staff who discovered him sometime after the collapse. Drazen Petrovic was buried at Mirogoj Cemetery in Zagreb, Croatia, after he died on June 7, 1993, at age 28 in a car accident on a German Autobahn while a passenger in a vehicle driven by his girlfriend. The New Jersey Nets shooting guard had become the first European player considered among the NBA's elite, averaging 22.3 points per game in his final season. He was inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame posthumously, and his number 7 jersey was retired by the Croatian national team. Lyle Alzado was buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California, after he died on May 14, 1992. At age 43 from brain lymphoma that he publicly attributed to his decades of anabolic steroid use. The Oakland Raiders defensive end had been one of the NFL's most feared players throughout the 1970s and 1980s. He spent his final months speaking publicly about steroid dangers, his emaciated face a stark contrast to the physical dominance he had built his entire identity around. Darryl Stingley was buried at Lake Forest Cemetery in Lake Forest, Illinois, after he died on April 5, 2007, at age 55 from complications related to his quadriplegia. The New England Patriots wide receiver had been paralyzed from the neck down following a 1978 preseason hit from Oakland Raiders safety Jack Tatum. He spent 29 years in a wheelchair and became a prominent advocate for spinal cord injury awareness and research before his death from kidney failure. Johnny Unitas was buried at Delaney Valley Memorial Gardens in Timonium, Maryland, after he died on September 11, 2002, at age 69 from a heart attack during a private workout. The Baltimore Colts quarterback had held the record for consecutive games with a touchdown pass, 47, for over 50 years. He was considered by many analysts and coaches to be the greatest quarterback in NFL history, a title he held without ever acknowledging it in the self-promotional terms the modern game demands. Gale Sayers was buried in Lenexa, Kansas, after he died on September 23, 2020, at age 77 from complications of dementia. And the Kansas Comet had been one of the most electrifying runners in NFL history, before devastating knee injuries in 1968 and 1970 effectively ended his career at 28. He was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame at 34, the youngest inductee in history, his name permanently associated with the heartbreak of peak talent cut short by the cruelty of the body's limits. Steve Prefontaine was buried at Rest Haven Memorial Park in Eugene, Oregon, after he died on May 30th, 1975, at age 24 when his Ford MGB rolled over and pinned him after a post-meet gathering near the University of Oregon campus. The distance runner held every American record from 2,000 to 10,000 meters at the time of his death, and had finished fourth in the 5,000 meters at the 1972 Munich Olympics, a result he considered a personal failure. He had never lost a collegiate race at any distance. Bill Masterton was buried at Resurrection Cemetery in Bloomington, Minnesota, after he died on January 15, 1968. At age 29, from a massive brain injury sustained 2 days earlier when he fell backward on the ice and struck his unhelmeted head during a Minnesota North Stars game in Bloomington. He remains the only player in NHL history to die as a direct result of injuries sustained during a game. The Bill Masterton Memorial Trophy has been awarded annually since 1968 to the player who best exemplifies perseverance and dedication to hockey. Marco Pantani was buried at a private cemetery in Cesenatico, Italy, after he died on February 14, 2004, at age 34 from acute cocaine poisoning alone in a hotel room in Rimini. The Italian cyclist had been one of the most celebrated climbers in Tour de France history, winning both the Tour and the Giro d'Italia in 1998, but was excluded from the Giro in 1999 due to a doping violation that shattered his career and sent him into a years-long spiral of depression and substance abuse from which he never recovered. Harry Agnes was buried at Woodlawn Cemetery in Everett, Massachusetts, after he died on June 27, 1955, at age 26, from a massive pulmonary embolism following a bout with pneumonia and pleurisy. The Boston Red Sox first baseman had been a two-sport star at Boston University, an All-American quarterback pursued by NFL teams, before choosing baseball. His death was mourned across New England as the loss of what might have been one of the sport's transcendent careers. Mickey Mantle was buried at Sparkman Hillcrest Memorial Park in Dallas, Texas, after he died on August 13, 1995, at age 63 from liver cancer, brought on by decades of heavy alcohol consumption, accelerated by a liver transplant just 2 months before his death. The Triple Crown winner and three-time American League MVP had been one of the most gifted athletes in baseball history. His career curtailed by knee injuries and personal demons, he spent his final years publicly regretting. Junior Seau was cremated after he died on May 2, 2012, at age 43 from a self-inflicted gunshot wound at his Oceanside, California, home. The San Diego Chargers linebacker shot himself in the chest, preserving his brain for scientific study. Posthumous examination revealed he had suffered from chronic traumatic encephalopathy, the degenerative brain disease linked to repeated head trauma. His death became a turning point in the NFL's concussion reckoning and its long-delayed acknowledgement of the sport's lasting physical toll on its players. Tony Lazzari was buried at Cypress Hills Cemetery in Brooklyn, New York, after he died on August 6, 1946, at age 42, when he was found at the bottom of a staircase in his San Francisco home, having apparently died from a fall during an epileptic seizure. The Yankees' second baseman had been one of the first Italian-American stars in Major League history, and a key figure on 5 World Championship teams throughout the 1920s and 1930s. He was found alone, his wife having been away from home at the time. Pete Maravich was cremated after he died on January 5, 1988, and were at age 40 from an undetected congenital heart defect during a pickup basketball game at a church gymnasium in Pasadena, California. The Pistol had averaged 44.2 points per game in college, a record that has never been approached, and went on to a celebrated NBA career. He had collapsed mid-game, surrounded by friends, just hours after telling an interviewer that he had never felt better in his life. Hector Camacho was buried in Puerto Rico after he died on November 24, 2012, at age 50 from a gunshot wound to the head, sustained during a drive-by shooting in Bayamon, Puerto Rico, 4 days before his death, while he sat in a parked car. The flamboyant Macho Man had won world titles in 3 weight classes throughout the 1980s and 1990s, and was one of boxing's most recognizable personalities through his sequined trunks and theatrical ring entrances. He was buried in his homeland following a national outpouring of mourning. Reggie White was buried at Sara Lee Memorial Park in Cornelius, North Carolina, after he died on December 26, 2004, at age 43 from a fatal cardiac arrhythmia related to sleep apnea and cardiac sarcoidosis at his home on a Sunday morning. The Minister of Defense had recorded 198 career quarterback sacks, still among the highest totals in NFL history, and was the most dominant defensive player of his generation. He was buried near his home in the North Carolina town where he had spent his final years. And Chuck Hughes was buried at Mount Hope Cemetery in Romulus, Michigan, after he died on October 24, 1971, at age 28, from a heart attack on the field during a Detroit Lions game against the Chicago Bears at Tiger Stadium. He collapsed in the end zone with minutes remaining in a game and could not be revived despite immediate medical attention. He remains the only player to die on the field during an NFL game, his death caused by severe arteriosclerosis that had gone undetected throughout his football career. Roberto Duran was buried at Jardín de Paz Cemetery in Panama City, Panama, after he died on April 27, 2025, at age 73 from complications of a stroke. Manos de Piedra had won world titles in 4 weight classes across a professional career spanning 33 years. That's his 1980 fights against Sugar Ray Leonard among the most watched boxing events in history. Flags were lowered to half-staff across Panama, and the government declared a national period of mourning for its most celebrated sporting son. Billy Martin was buried at Gate of Heaven Cemetery in Hawthorne, New York, after he died on December 25, 1989, at age 61 in a pickup truck crash near his farm in Binghamton, New York, on Christmas afternoon. The 5-time Yankees manager, hired and fired by George Steinbrenner 5 separate times, had been one of the most volatile, combative, and beloved figures in baseball for 3 decades. He is buried not far from Babe Ruth, in the same cemetery where he had visited the Babe's grave during his own lifetime. Tim Richmond was buried at a cemetery in Ashland, Ohio, after he died on August 13, 1989, at age 34 from AIDS-related pneumonia. The NASCAR driver had been one of the sport's most charismatic and talented figures throughout the mid-1980s, winning 14 races and finishing in the top 10 in championships before his health began to decline in 1987. His AIDS diagnosis was kept private for years after his death, making him one of the first major American athletes posthumously confirmed to have died from the disease. Ryan Friel was buried at Green Lawn Cemetery in Jacksonville, Florida, after he died on December 22, 2012, at age 36, from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The Cincinnati Reds utility player was posthumously found to have had stage 2 chronic traumatic encephalopathy, making him the first Major League Baseball player diagnosed with CTE. He had suffered at least 10 concussions during his playing career and had struggled openly with depression, anxiety, and behavioral problems in the years following his retirement from baseball. Walter Camp was buried at Evergreen Cemetery in New Haven, Connecticut, after he died on March 14, 1925, at age 65 from a heart attack at the National Collegiate Athletic Association's Rules Committee meeting in New York, literally at a football meeting. The father of American football had established the line of scrimmage, the down and distance system, and the concept of the quarterback, transforming rugby into the distinctly American game. He died mid-sentence, still shaping the sport. Josh Hancock was buried at Christ Church Cathedral Cemetery in St. Louis, Missouri, after he died on April 29, 2007, at age 29 in a car crash in St. Louis. When the SUV he was driving while intoxicated struck a tow truck parked on the highway with its lights activated. The St. Louis Cardinals pitcher had been with the team for less than a season, and his death prompted Major League Baseball to prohibit clubs from providing alcohol in their clubhouses, a policy change that had been discussed but never implemented before his crash. Steve McNair was buried at Westwood Cemetery in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, after he was shot and killed on July 4, 2009, at age 36 by his girlfriend at his Nashville condominium, in what was ruled a murder-suicide. The Tennessee Titans quarterback who had shared the NFL MVP award in 2003 with Peyton Manning was found dead alongside his 20-year-old girlfriend, who would then turn the weapon on herself. He was buried in his home state of Mississippi following a private funeral. These are the places the games led, not to trophies or ticker tape, but to ground that receives everyone equally and keeps what the lights of the stadium could not hold. 60 names on stones across a country that never stopped watching them play.